I am a huge fan of the Scythe Trilogy. So when I found out in 2022 that Gleanings, the prequel, was going to be published, I immediately added it to my TBR and now I've finally read it. Gleanings really gives us a bigger picture of the Scythe Trilogy by letting us see Scythes around the world and in different time periods, but we also get to kind of round out some of the characters we know from the original trilogy, especially Scythe Curie and Scythe Goddard, with a couple cameos of our other characters along the way. If you don't know what Scythe is, it's sort of a futuristic story where AI has become both our god and government. So this was just as thought-provoking as the original trilogy, and like the original trilogy, it's not necessarily like a happy story all the time. It will mess with you, so keep that in mind. But if you have read Gleanings or you've read the trilogy and you just kind of want to know what happens in this book, I'm gonna go into each story in depth. So if you have not read it and you don't want to be spoiled, this is your time to exit. There is a short poem at the beginning of this that is called The First Swing. It's sort of a reminder of what Scythes are, what they do, just because this was published a good bit later than the original trilogy, so I think this was a nice lead-in, and it's written from the point of view of the Scythedom, so it feels weirdly like a Pledge of Allegiance, but for people who kill other people as a job. In the first actual story, Formidable, we get to see Scythe Curie at the beginning of her time as a Scythe. So Scythe Curie is a friend of Scythe Faraday, and Faraday was Citra and Rowan's mentor. So she's kind of down double when it comes to people taking her like very seriously. In this story, it is her first conclave as a real Scythe. She's no longer an apprentice. And it's also really early on in the Thunderhead's rule. There's still a government, there's still a president, like in Washington. So been a rough transition, and because those people still believe that they have authority over all the different regions of the country, which have now been broken up into smaller regions, it's causing people to not take the Thunderhead super seriously because they still have these leaders that they've known and a system that they've understood for years. A lot of people at this point don't even think Scythes are real. So at Conclave, Scythe Curie decides to propose that they go and assassinate the entire government. The rest of the Conclave just kind of laughs at her because they don't think that's a serious proposition. They're like, oh, if the Thunderhead wants them taken care of, then he's going to take care of them. But her argument is that that is the only thing the Thunderhead can't do for itself when it comes to establishing its rule, is that it can't kill people. If the Scythedom wants to be recognized as the kind of governing body that they are, then they need the Thunderhead to be recognized as the authority. They don't agree with her, but it doesn't really matter because Scythes are sort of, they don't really have to answer to anyone. There's only a couple rules. So Scythe Curie just goes and does it anyways. This is the action that Scythe Curie did that made her so formidable. So by the time we meet Rowan and Citra, Scythe Curie is like super respected. Even though in this story, Maria is like super young and she still mentally refers to herself as Susan. She hasn't really been able to get rid of her, real name yet. She hasn't fully embodied her Scythe name. But when she goes and kills all these government leaders, we do see the person that she becomes and like this weird, unwavering moral compass that she has, because the Secretary of State tells the president, like, let's just make a deal with her, like Scythes will make deals all the time, and she says that she's not that kind of Scythe, and then takes them all out. The next time all the Scythes are together, it's very clear to Scythe Curie that people actually respect her now. There's, whisperings that one day she's going to become High Blade, and people are starting to call her Little Miss Murder, which later we know her as like the Grande Dame of Death. So it's clear how that's sort of projected, and she even says kind of internally to herself that she thinks she's going to outgrow the name Little Miss Murder, and she clearly does. Some of these stories were more unsettling than others, which is like kind of to be expected, but Never Work with Animals was just really, really creepy. We meet Scythe Fields, who is a Scythe who, anytime he decides he wants a new pet, he just goes and gleans the owners of the dog that he wants. And it's really weird because when he's about to kill the owners of this dog, they're not pleading for their life or anything. They're just telling him over and over, about like how special this dog is, how smart this dog is. And like, I can see them loving a dog that much, but it was like weird how they were saying it. And it turns out that they weren't wrong, because this dog that Scythe Fields has renamed Trixie is super, super smart. Like, he will just talk to her, not really give commands, like he'll just talk to her like a person, and it's clear that she understands him. But here's the problem. That dog understands what happened and wants to kill Scythe Fields for killing his owners. We later find out that this dog was like genetically modified. It is basically human, and it's able to make coherent plans to kill Scythe Fields over and over again. And he has to keep getting revived, because the only way a scythe can really die is self-gleaning. Over time, Scythe Fields is like, maybe this dog is out to get me. Like, every time he like dies and then gets revived, he remembers that he tripped over Trixie, or like something happened that it seems like it's her fault, and he starts to feel crazy, because obviously, how could a dog murder him? Especially when this dog seems so perfect for him, because Scythe Fields really views himself very highly. He thinks he's, super intelligent. So of course he should have a super intelligent dog to match. Eventually, he loses it, and he traps Trixie in a box and leaves it at the ocean for her to drown. And he's like losing it, and he's thinking this is like Schrodinger's cat. Like, who knows if the dog is dead or alive? Like, she's just in this box. Like, we won't know until we open the box, and it's driving him crazy. The dog ends up getting revived. When he goes to pick her up from the revival center, it's very unsettling. And they sort of have a back and forth of them trying to kill one another, him and his dog. At this point, I'm not only creeped out by Fields, I'm creeped out by the dog as well. And then when Scythe Lucifer, who we know is Rowan, shows up to glean Scythe Fields, the dog starts like reacting, and Rowan is like, oh, I see, he's your kill. Like, he's your person to take. So Fields really has to humble himself. He and the dog have like made this pact that she's going to act like a dog when they're out in public, but in reality, they both know that this dog is running the show. It's really hard for him to accept that a dog has bested him, but he spends his nights sleeping in the dog bed while Trixie gets his big, nice, comfortable bed. To be honest, it really felt like sort of like a Ray Bradbury's type of story. Like, it sticks with you and you just really can't figure out how you feel about it. A Death of Many Colors was really interesting, because it was during that time, so early on, that a lot of people didn't even think scythes were real. They'd never even known of one in their region. We follow Dax Robinson, who is the son of this couple who throws really extravagant Halloween parties every single year. And this year he invites his friends and his crush. The kids sort of get onto the topic about the Thunderhead, and Dax goes on and on about how the Thunderhead has brainwashed people into believing that scythes are real and into believing that he's the main authority. But as the party goes on, he gets like lured away by his crush, and he's like looking at her wings, because at this point, body modifications are normal. It was very like Hunger Games capital, because I don't think we really see that type of stuff inside. Like, by the time we get to the normal trilogy, people have probably like given up that part of like technology. They just don't want those modifications. But she has these angelic wings, and she's like, oh, I'm actually a scythe. You're actually getting gleaned right now. And her method of gleaning is to pick people up and fly them up super high and drop them. That's already eerie enough, but once Dax splats onto the ground, people around him start like laughing and applauding, because like splatting is often like just something stupid that teenagers do because they know they're gonna get revived. But then this girl with these angel wings, who is called Scythe Truth, comes out and she tells the parents, like, hey, kiss the ring for a year of immunity, your son's dead. And for a lot of people at the party, this is the first moment they even believe that scythes are real. The only comedic relief in this story is the way that Halloween has evolved over time and the misunderstandings of like past Halloween. Because obviously we say trick or treat, but at some point people started to believe that people from the mortal age would say trigger or treat, which meant to give someone a treat or they would kill them. And they would talk about it like, oh, the mortals, like they were so weird. Like, Unsavory Row follows a girl named Killa who decides to become unsavory because she's angry at the Thunderhead. She's generally angry at the world because her brother got gleaned. She drops out of school to go live in an unsavory pod with other unsavories, and the whole point of the unsavories is that they can sort of get the bad tendencies out of them, but the Thunderhead has it set up so that they can do so in like a safe manner. He's still like taking care of them. And so she goes and she's, smashing windows at museums and doing all this stuff, but then like there's no catharsis there for her, because as soon as she does all that stuff, roll out the cleaning crew, like they were expecting it. It's their job to just clean up after her, and no one cares. It's hard for her to actually hurt someone. So she decides that she wants to do something really bad. She wants to like hurt the Thunderhead. And her little pod of unsavories decide to, form a plan to go hurt the Thunderhead. But right as, she's going through the steps with her pod and she realizes, like, this is a simulation too. At some point, this plan was approved by the Thunderhead, and the Thunderhead is almost playing into it, because when she messes up the technology and stuff, the Thunderhead is acting like it's messed him up. And even the main person who is head of her pod turns out to be a Nimbus agent who works for the Thunderhead. Like, her job is to help unsavories get this need for destruction out of them and become part of society again. So Killa stabs the Nimbus agent, which seemed like a weird choice. She's obviously gonna be fine. She's gonna be revived. It's, again, she can't really hurt someone in a permanent way. But she's like, at least it felt real. Like, it felt real to kill someone. And then we get a hint that Killa is going to become a Nimbus agent herself. Like, she's talking to her Nimbus agent, like, oh, you'll be a good one day too. And I was like, that is just kind of the weirdest ending that I could have possibly imagined for that story. This one wasn't really my favorite of the bunch, but it does give kind of a good idea of how the Thunderhead deals with unsavories, because we don't get tons and tons of it in the original trilogy. A Martian Minute was probably my favorite one, because we get an inside look at evil Scythe Goddard when he was really young. And this is before he was a Scythe, so he's Carson Lusk at this point, and he lives on Mars with his parents. Even though his main goal for the entire story is to get off of Mars and get back to Earth so he can go to university. He lived on Earth until he was 9, and then his family took this voyage out to Mars because, being immortal, people needed more space, and they were sort of the first expedition of people to try out Mars as a planet that they could expand on. Scythe Xenocrates, who is the second under Scythe at the time, is going to be coming to visit, and he needs a personal valet. Carson wants this job bad. He's super interested in Scythes. He thinks it's cool what they do, and he low-key wants to be one. We all know from the Scythe Trilogy that anyone who wants to be a Scythe cannot become one. You can't be picked if you want to be a Scythe, probably because they think you're going to go on some crazy killing spree. And at this point, we've already seen Carson think about violence multiple times, and because he likes his best friend's girlfriend, he even imagines letting the guy out of Mars's airlock so that he dies. It's just stuff like that where you're like, my guy, calm down. To make it worse, that best friend, Archer, is chosen to be the valet. And Carson's parents tell him that he actually did get accepted to a lot of Earth universities, but they had been hiding all of his acceptance letters, and now it's too late for him to go, and that he has to stay another 2 years on Mars with them. He is just beyond pissed, and he realizes his only shot at making it off of Mars anytime soon is to become the valet. So he takes Archer out to these big fields where there's these giant drills that go into Mars, they're building more out in another section of the planet. And that's their job. This is a normal day for them. It's not abnormal that Carson and Archer would go out there, but it is abnormal that Carson would let Archer go and fix one of the drills and then turn it on while he's there. This is obviously going to cause major damage. Archer goes deadish, and it's going to take several days for him to be reconstructed and brought back to life, which would mean he can no longer be Xenocrates' valet. So Carson shows up in his place and gets the job. He is majorly kissing up to Xenocrates, but Xenocrates doesn't mind. He just sees it as ambition. He likes that Carson wants to get ahead. He likes that Carson admits that he is absolutely miserable on Mars, because Xenocrates clearly doesn't like Mars either, and everyone is just on pins and needles around him, because even though he said he's not going to glean anyone, there's really nothing the Thunderhead could do to stop him from gleaning anyone. But he doesn't do anything. Everyone's kind of like, why is he here? And he ends up telling Carson that he's going to get an internship at the main power center of Mars, and he sort of forces the issue to make sure it happens, which Carson originally is like, okay, is this just like a thank you for doing a good job? He doesn't really understand it, but he does know that Scythe Xenocrates had kind of mentioned to him that like an event needed to occur on Mars for their way of life to continue, for the Scythe way of life to continue. Because if life on other planets is viable, then there's no need for a job where people just kill other people, because, there would be enough space that no one would have to die. So Carson takes this as mission to sabotage the main reactor at the power core. And when the doctor comes rushing in, because obviously all of the alarms are going off, he's like, Thunderhead, fix it. Like, what are you doing? And the Thunderhead says, I can't interfere in a Scythe action, because Carson was technically directed by Scythe Xenocrates. Honestly, this story would make such a good movie, because it was just so much visual detail. I could see everything so perfectly, especially this moment of the doctor just like realizing what's happened. At this point in his life, Carson still sort of has a heart, and he had made sure that his parents were out in the fields when this happened so that they would be away from this main reactor. And so he's hoping that they're going to be fine. He's trying to get the girl that he likes to come with him on this bus situation back to Earth. He even says to her, I am your salvation, I am your deliverance, which is what he says to people when he kills them when he becomes a Scythe. She refuses, but he obviously wants to go to Earth more than he wants to be with her. And on the way there, they have to like vent the cabin, so he goes deadish and he gets revived back on Earth, only to find out that the reaction that he started was way bigger than he anticipated. So his parents, his best friend, the girl that he likes, none of them can be revived. Life on Mars is just not going to be a thing. And because the Thunderhead can't really talk about the Scythedom or their actions, he can't tell them. He can't tell the people. Mars would have worked out if it hadn't been for this. All these people see is like, oh my gosh, this colony that we started, that we had so much hope in, it's impossible. Like, stuff like this is always going to happen, and we need the Scythes to continue. We can only live on Earth. And then Carson tells Xenocrates that he doesn't want to go to one of the universities. He wants to be taught to become a Scythe, which you'd think after taking out an entire planet full of people, he'd have that streak out of him, but no. Xenocrates agrees to train him, even though clearly you're not supposed to take on someone who wants to be a Scythe. And he's also started the process of his gold, robe. So he has this 24 karat gold sewn into the robe, and he says that he plans to do the whole thing, which obviously we know that he does. And Carson's like, won't that be heavy? And Xenocrates says, it's not like I'm going to be swimming in it. LOL. Poor guy. The mortal canvas is like the ultimate horror story for art students. A Scythe comes into an art class and says that he wants them to make art that is as moving as the art from the Mortal Age. And whoever does the best will get a year of immunity. And the class kind of automatically thinks, I have to win or I am getting gleaned. Like, they think it's a year of immunity or be gleaned. And with the way the Scythedom works, it's not completely out of question that that would be what's going to happen. So the kids are going crazy trying to figure this out. And because at this point they are so immersed in technology that they don't really know how to make Mortal Age art. And it's because they were born after the Mortal Age. So these kids were born into a world where they were considered immortal. The main character, Morty, ironically, realizes that to create art that is, worthy of the Mortal Age, he has to understand what it's like to create art with this sort of pressure of time. Like the understanding in the back of your mind that you only have so much time to create, you're going to die. So he paints the Scythe Clint, naked, sort of like a portrait from the Mortal Age. But obviously the initial reaction from the Scythe isn't great. And the reason he did that is because he knows that to understand the worry of death, he needs to know that the Scythe could very well kill him as soon as he reveals the painting. He explains this, that he understood that Mortal Age art had a lot to do with the fear of death, and gains respect from the Scythe. Now, he doesn't win because it's a like an audience votes type of thing. So one of the other kids wins, but I think in Scythe Clint's eyes, Morty won. But then the Scythe kills the art teacher. Apparently, she was the last person left who had been born during the mortal age. So she was born before immortality was possible and has an understanding of like mortal age art because of that. She even says, because her students have kind of, at least Morty, has kind of understood what mortal age art meant, she says that her life's work is completed. And the kids cannot understand what that means because they don't see their life as having an end. They don't see something that they need to accomplish before they die. It was really interesting to think of it that way, but also it was just like, it was really sad because I loved the art teacher. Curie is a first-person narrative from like the point of view of one of the mini Thunderheads. Curie is sort of the Thunderhead for each of the ships that is going out at the end of book 3, departing for new worlds. And this one really sort of humanizes the Thunderhead a little bit more. Curie is sort of like baby version of the Thunderhead, so I feel like it almost feels less mature than talking to the Thunderhead. It talks about wanting to tell people things, like they came so close to being hit by an asteroid and they just barely missed it, and he wants to tell the passengers that, but he can't because that's not his job. Like, he's supposed to hold these things back from them, but he does like dim the lights in honor of the people who did die, and because these ships, like, they're not going to get revived. If there's no life left on board, it's a self-destruct situation. And even though it was nighttime and no one else would have noticed that he dimmed the lights, he did it anyway, which I feel like shows sort of like a humanity to him. He didn't do it for the benefit of the passengers, he did it for the benefit of himself. And we do see the Thunderhead get more of a personality, especially when the Thunderhead sort of takes a human form. But this was a nice look inside the emotions of like an entity that is not physically there, ruling over actual human people. Anastasia's Shadow is about Citra's younger brother, Ben. He gets taken away by Scythe Constantine because this is right after we find out that Citra has been sank to the bottom of the ocean and no one knows where she is. And so Scythe Constantine goes to get Ben to train him to kind of take her place, sort of. Ben is not super happy about this, but you don't really have a choice if you're chosen to become a Scythe, so he starts the training. And he's super sore all the time, obviously, so they start bringing in masseuses. There's a new one each day, and he realizes they're probably not coming back because they're probably getting gleaned. Like, there's too much information because Ben is being trained in secret, so obviously if anyone says anything, it's gonna be real bad because they're hiding from Scythe Goddard. Until one of them, Raj, starts coming back again and again. And we believe that it's because the Scythedom was sort of waiting for Ben to actually care about one of these people because they need someone for his final test. Because your final test is to, like, glean someone that you care about, even though it's only deadish. Like, they don't actually die permanently. And Ben was on the receiving end of that because he was Citra's final test. Ben knows that he can't do this. He can't pass the final test. So he and Raj make this whole escape plan to leave the compound that they're in and run away together. But Constantine catches on, so when Ben shows up to Raj's room, it's Constantine instead, which obviously Ben thinks that now Raj has been gleaned, but right at this point, we find that Citra has been found. She's going to be making her return as Scythe Anastasia, and so Constantine just sort of lets Ben go. He says, "I'm not as much of a monster as you think," and he gives Ben a new identity, sends him to Europe, where he runs into Raj, except Raj has been supplanted by someone named Milan. Ben remembers everything, but we get the idea that he sort of lets that fade into the background and that they end up becoming a couple in a way better situation than they would have ever had if they were still Ben and Raj. The Persistence of Memory is a story about a rivalry between two Scythes. Scythe Dali is feared, and Scythe Gotti is loved. And he has a tendency to mess up Dolly's gleanings because Dolly really likes to do these big showcases and have an audience and get people involved in it and just make a huge spectacle of it. After a failed gleaning because of Scythe Gotti, he decides to build this giant clock which is going to set off all these mechanisms and then shoot an arrow at the person he's decided to glean. He decides to glean Scythe Gotti's niece, but after he talks to her for a while, he ends up really respecting her and not wanting to kill her. And so at the last moment, when the arrow is being fired, he jumps in front of her and essentially thinks he's about to self-glean, but whatever he built, the arrow is not strong enough and doesn't actually kill him. And he's like, oh dang, I should have put poison in the arrow. Because now, after all of these failures, these public failures, he has now publicly failed to self-glean, which loses the respect of people even more, which is basically his nightmare. But at least the niece gets to live, which was nice. Meet Cute and Die was really interesting because the Scythe in this story really reminds me of like the Queen of Hearts from Alice in Wonderland. Marnie is the niece of Scythe Boudica and lives with her. But the thing is, like, this Scythe, because her niece is really the only one who lives with her, like, she doesn't have any other relationships. She doesn't want Marnie to go and date someone and leave her. And so Marnie has like never had a boyfriend, even though I think she's mid-20s, early 30s. And so she has a meet cute with this guy and then completely hides it from her aunt. But when she accidentally goes deadish, because she's known for being quite clumsy, this boyfriend, Cochrane, and Scythe Boudica like meet in the waiting room. Now, when Scythe Boudica wants to kill someone, she invites them over for tea, and she invites Cochrane over for tea. And she takes him to the top of the castle, as this is like kind of her pattern to, view her entire property, and she has him stand on a springboard, but he doesn't know it's a springboard. Anybody getting gleaned doesn't know it's a springboard. But the idea is that she'll release it and it'll toss the person across her property to this giant target made of cement. Marnie knows what's going on though, so she pushes her aunt over the springboard and Cochrane ends up out of the way and she launches the springboard with the scythe on it. But the thing is that Marnie tells everyone the truth about what she did, because most people would assume that Scythe Boudica had self-gleaned, and if you self-glean, you can't come back. But since it was her niece, then she gets revived, which honestly shows how much she loves her aunt, because that is gutsy to bring back a scythe that you killed. And Scythe Boudica thinks the same thing, because she's like, okay, I am 100% gleaning you. And the niece is like, you can't, because I'm part of your, immediate enough family that she can't be gleaned, because close enough to the family of a scythe, you cannot be killed by anyone. And while she was dead, because she said, over my dead body, will you marry Cochrane? She and Cochrane got married. And so now he's part of, the line of people who cannot be killed by a scythe, including the scythe that they're related to. And then they're just going to live with her. Like, it was so weird, because I think Marnie just has a deep understanding of her aunt and where this protectiveness is coming from. And it's sort of a place of selfishness, that she doesn't want to be alone. And so Marnie's like, well, you can accept me and my new husband and we'll live with you, despite the fact that you tried to kill him and then she actually killed her, and it's just a mess. Or she's like, if you can't accept that, then we're gonna go live alone and you'll be by yourself. And so they just end up living together. And then Scythe Boudica tells her niece, hey, make sure to invite my nurse that I didn't particularly like over for tea. Like, what was that story? Like, it's just so wild. But it has I picture her as the cartoon Queen of Hearts. Her chance to glean was just weird. Like, good, but weird. It's about this kid named Dane who, at this point in the technology that they have, you can have friends in your dreams and you can go into other people's dreams and you can construct places and stuff until, like, he starts getting stalked by this person who, like, they'll change into different forms. So, like, it'd be a dragon or a leopard or whatever it is, but it's always Paisley. And he finds out that the newest scythe in his area has decided to wear a Paisley robe, because you get to pick, your one signature color or pattern. And so this Scythe Borgia is showing up in every single one of his dreams, chasing him, and Dane doesn't really know. He's like, if I get gleaned in a dream, does that mean, like, I actually die? And I think it kind of plays into that idea that if you die in a dream, theoretically, if you die in a dream, you die in real life. I have no idea if that has any scientific backing. That's one of those stories like kids tell one another. It's like, oh, if you die in your dream, like, you're not waking up. And so I'm wondering if that's where that's coming from. And he ends up making a agreement with Scythe Borgia, because, like, his friend, he doesn't want his friend to be chased anymore. And so he's like, okay, if you let us go, like, you can chase me through my dreams forever. Like, if you don't glean us, I will become your prey permanently. And he does. Like, the ending of the story is just him being chased every single night for the rest of his life, and then eventually, I guess if he gives up and he gets tired of it, then he gets gleaned. Very creepy vibes. A Dark Curtain Rises is mainly a conversation between Cirrus, the thunderhead of one of the ships, and a woman who is getting supplanted with Scythe Curie's memories. Because we know that Scythe Curie, she was like killed to a point that she could not be revived. But also, if you remember, like, the Thunderhead is going to be sending this giant group of Tonus to a new planet, and his goal is to supplant the memories of the people who are on that ship with the memories of, like, the smartest, the best, like, the top tier that humanity has to offer, because they're going to be starting this whole new world. And Scythe Curie is one of those people. And she's sort of getting this second chance of life combined with the Tonist, whose name is Jessica, but she decides to go by Susan kind of in honor of Scythe Curie. And it's a weird combination of their personalities both being in the same person and, like, having some of Scythe Curie's memories and stuff like that. But luckily, she doesn't have to be a Scythe anymore because they are expanding, like, they're gonna have plenty of space. She gets to do, like, any job she wants, and she decides to open a restaurant, which was kind of a nice full circle moment because Scythe Curie, every time she would glean someone, she would invite the family over and cook for them because she was a really good cook, and Citra even mentioned, like, how good the food was. The only downside is that, like, Faraday's not gonna be there. I really wanted them to end up together, like, after all they've been through. And they couldn't really date ever, and now Scythe Faraday just doesn't make that top cut of, you know, the best and brightest that humanity has to offer or whatever. And Cirrus even tells her, like, she was the only Scythe who made it. So it was just, like, a really bittersweet moment there. Overall, I really liked this book. It rounded out the world of the Scythedom really well for me. And it did a good job of showing what different personalities look like when a person becomes a Scythe. I really do think that Scythe is one of the, like, most artfully crafted trilogies out there, and Gleanings really just added to that. I want to read more Neal Shusterman for sure. I know that he wrote Unwind, which came out a really long time ago, but I've never read it. And apparently it's, like, being taught in schools now. It's so good. So definitely adding that to the TBR. Have you read Scythe? Have you read Gleanings? If you did, what did you think? What was your favorite story of the bunch? Mine is probably, like, the Scythe Goddard origin story, just because I wanted to know how that happened. Please like this video if you liked it. Click subscribe if you want to talk about more book stuff. My name's Kaylin. Thanks for watching. Bye!